I just finished talking with Fura Johannesdottir, Global Chief Creative Officer at Interbrand, and she describes the skills that she thinks will be really important in the future, how design might change and shift, the role of agents as sort of a new kind of consumer in addition to the existing people, and we get into side projects and how important they are. I'm Andrew Hogan, Head of Insights at Figma, and this is FigBrew. Fura, thanks for being on FigBrew.
Oh, thank you, Andrew, for the invitation.
So glad to have you here. We've been friends for a long time. I'm glad we're doing this. I brought you on for some really modern takes on brand. So I think you're ready.
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. So the biggest thing, you and I had this really interesting discussion because I'm an analyst. I'm an industry analyst. That's like what I do, about the difference between analysis and creativity and strategy and creativity. And how do you think about those things as distinct or the same in this sort of like 2025 modern world, generative AI everywhere, everyone's talking about that. How do you think about those things at this moment?
When I think about analysis and creativity and strategy and creativity, I actually think they're in many ways interlinked. And I think they need to become more and more interlinked as we move into this kind of new era of AI or personalization or whatever we call it. But to me, like the best creatives are really good in strategy and analytical thinking. And the best strategists and analytical people are actually really strong in creativity. I think what's different is that maybe we have different types of crafts and skills. So, a designer is a designer and they have quality of craft is what they aspire to have. And then you have the writers and they do their thing. And a brilliant strategist comes up with really insightful kind of creative insights that just kind of shift the whole thing. And I think it's the partnership and the dialogue between all of those different people that make the magic. It's not like, creativity is a way of being. I don't think it's necessarily a craft or a discipline.
One group you didn't mention in there is, developers, engineers, technologists. Do you think of them in the same category, or are they somewhere different?
No, completely interlinked, and in my previous lives and in many of my jobs, my best friends have actually been the engineers because they're hyper creative. And when you have a curious technologist who is obsessing about the future and is kind of constantly in play mode, those are the people that actually really change your thinking. And there are those, aha moments. And they actually shift the work drastically because they know what's possible. And I think a lot of people think that engineers are the no-sayers. But if you work with brilliant engineers, they're actually the yay-sayers. Let's go further. Let's try more. So I think they're critical in this kind of, we could call it trio, strategy, craft, and
trio, quintet. We're getting broader. Yeah,
exactly.
Totally. So you talked about. Do you think the analysis is kind of the core of this, and finding some unique point that is in tension with the future or the present or something like that? Or am I kind of just thinking about that wrong?
No, I think analysis, when you think about, I think there are a couple of things with analysis that I think are very important. I think the first one is just around people and humans and understanding what the drivers are. But also the other thing that I've always really thought is very powerful is to project the future. And I think people who are very analytical and good at that kind of projection are very valuable, because that actually sets us up in a way that we can now, start preparing brands for that future, and also just be a part of creating it. It's like brands that wait and see what the other people are going to do, they're never going to be able to kind of drive on that kind of uptake of things. And I think if you work with a great analyst, you can actually do that. That's the kind of the magic trick.
What are some ways that brands can sort of rise on the upswing, that you can sort of lead the way? What's a good example now, or a good way of being now for companies that want to be there?
What's kind of interesting about that is that our intuition in this point in time is risk averse. that do with finances and shareholder, and we're always looking for, we want to be certain that something is right. I think what's interesting about it, if you want to be on the uptake, you have to have a risk-taking culture. It can be calculated risk because today we do have the tools, but you have to have that. And I think the second thing, you truly need to know who you are as a brand. So, because I think that's kind of the core of it, is like, I know who I am. I can't do this risk because it's right for my brand. I should be playing in that space. Calculated risk, let's call it. And then you can really be on the forefront. But if you don't do that, one of the things that I keep coming back to is, I think taking no risk is the biggest risk. In today's world, the competition is so high.
Yeah. So that was for, companies. You need to take risks, sort of know who you are. What about for people and people who are thinking about what skills they need to have?
Yeah.
Like you and I have talked about WEF's sort of skills for the future.
Yeah.
I know you've looked at those.
Yeah.
What should you do if you're a person who wants to be sort of a big part of building the future, or a bigger part of building the future?
Yeah. I hate to say this, but I think the first thing is you need to be the best in your craft. Because of AI and all the things that are happening around us, and if you're a designer who really loves design, don't be afraid of the tools. You just have to do that. I think curiosity is key. You need to be a curious person. Really lean into your curiosity. I think that's one thing. Go deep, because everybody is doing surface level stuff, but go deep. Hone in onto your craft and really master your craft. I think, if you want to beat the machine, which is actually just going to make us better, like really lean onto your craft. But what I think it's really interesting about, that particular report is that we're talking about skills also that might not be natural to people, like systems thinking, like really understand how the whole thing works together. It's about resilience and not giving up and just constantly go. And there's a lot of soft skills going to be in play in the future, like human understanding, empathy, then with kind of this right blend of resilience and curiosity. It's a lot of things, but I do think it's critical moving forward to kind of hone in not only on craft skills, but also kind of communication and human skills.
I mean, I can't help but see the parallels with what you were describing earlier: analysis versus creativity, being able to think about where to go, and how to understand a particular situation or imagine some sort of future. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to chat with you about this, because you think about the team that you have, you think about how they should grow, and yeah, the WEF's 2030 skills, it's an expansive set of things, and then you're like, you've got to be great at this thing, that to be better than the machine at doing something that for machines that can do many things, but do they do all of them well? If you're a person that's feeling maybe a little bit overwhelmed by the number of things you're supposed to take on, you would say, be really good at the one thing you're expected to be good at, whether it's writing, whether it's visual design, whether it's interaction design. And then do you dabble in the other things, or do you get really good at two things? How should people think about that?
I think you should be very good at your core craft. I think, because trying to do too many things is never going to work. You simply just don't have time to do it, I think. But be very good at your core craft and be literate at the other things. But I do think what we need to train in all of us is the systems thinking and the analytical thinking, because building a brand in one dimension doesn't work. If you think about brand is not only brand identity, it's the whole experience you have with brand. And you don't fully understand that you need to, and it's also then it's in the internal employee experience. So it's like really, really, really being able to have that systems thinking, so you can really understand how your narrative or your strategy or design is going to travel across all of those touch points is critical. And I do know that AI is going to help us with the traveling part a little bit. But I do think it's important. But what I would encourage everybody to do, though, core skills, but also like really take care of your creative side, because we have been running on a treadmill for a while now, and a lot of designers and creatives and strategists are literally just trying to get stuff done, but not trying to think about what is the right thing to do and how do I create something that new, exciting, and use my creativity to create that future we're talking about. I think we're kind of a little bit stuck in status quo, and now it's the opportunity to take off. But you have to be brilliant at your core skill to do that, and you need to be curious and creative and explore things that kind of lie outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, and the part that you talked about earlier was being able to see humans and humans in different situations. That's sort of how I interpret your point about systems thinking, is the humans in all of those different contexts and situations, and that they behave differently. And that sounds, that sounds like it might be more critical.
I think that's more critical than ever, is to understand how the human behaves in a day, in a moment. It's like, how do things kind of shift and change in a physical space? You're expecting very different things than if you're in a digital space. But then we're talking about the humans, and we talked earlier about the agents.
So let's get to that. So we have the existing, 8 billion people and what they do, now.
Yeah.
And how they behave in these different situations. And that I think we all believe they will probably use, agents in the future. I want to hear from you. What does that mean about who you're designing for, and how to think about that kind of future world of brand building?
I think the world just got really complicated for us designers because of this. It's like
just more complicated. That you said systems thinking for a reason. It is more complicated.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think what is kind of the combining factor is the needs, human needs, and the needs factor, and what they're actually looking for in each type of moment. So if you understand the human need, really deeply understand it, which travels kind of, pretty well, I think you're going to be designing for the agents as well in many ways, because they are serving their humans. So, that's one point. That's just to kind of go into that need system is key. But then there is kind of a hygiene as well, in terms of you need to be laser focused on your brand purpose, your values, your narrative and story that you put out into the world. You need to be very crystal clear around your offering and the product and whatever you might be doing, to make sure that, the agents are going to be crawling you and recommending you and get to the top of the chain. And then there are all the other things, which is like price awareness, like how are you gonna price yourself? Like, is it gonna be more dynamic pricing? I don't know. Like,
so what you've described is like agents go out and they like, here's a couple hotels that you maybe should look at for your upcoming stay. Hey, I'm worried about your flight because this thing might happen.
Yeah.
Or, you're generally in the market for toddler clothes, and here's some toddler clothes for you that you might want to look for. I know you're interested in organic cotton. And I guess there's the whole avenue of work also, and how work sort of gets done. But this is also some sort of point in the future, and there's like a transition period. But what you're describing is that agents go out, do these things, and sort of come back to us humans. Is that right?
Yeah, I at least in the beginning, I think at least when we're getting the training wheels going, like they will ask you for input, and you can control your agent. You can put in your values, you can put in brands that you love to interact with, and if you have any preferences, you can do that. Which is why it's so important for brands to get the narrative and the story and show out in the world and have real world impact, because you are going to influence the end consumer in the end of the day, and they're going to feed back into the agents. So there is like this kind of complicated circle going on that's going to dictate what they do. But what I think is interesting in terms of communication is it's probably going to be voice activated, but potentially image-based feedback as well. You're booking a hotel. You probably want to see it first. If you're buying a shoe, you probably want to see it. So I think this is gonna be a transition period that we're gonna go through, and I'm very excited about it. We have to rethink how we connect to brands and to each other.
You talk about being clear with your who your brand is, what your products are, things like that. Isn't that kind of true now with, SEO? Haven't we already kind of done that, or is this something like SEO times 10? What is this?
I think it's bigger. I think it's exactly that. I think it's SEO times, I don't know what, like a lot, because um, if when the data gets better, and consumers will be able to validate it, or even like the agents. So it's like, is what you're saying actually what you're doing? And there is going to be more data to support that. And in the end of the day, what's not changing is that there needs to be a trust between the consumer and like the end user from a brand perspective. I think because the data is so rich, it's going to be much easier to no more much more difficult to do the greenwashing, and it's going to be much more difficult to be like, we are, an ethical company that takes really great care of our employees, because the narrative out in the world is going to feed into the system, and that's real data. So this is why I think it's never been more important to be truthful, to actually act and be a little bit of a purist, and because consumers are going to ask more of brands in the future anyways. So I think this is kind of the things that is really interesting. So I would say that this is taking SEO to a whole different level, and in some ways, because SEO, you're kind of trying to control what's searchable. This is going to go a little bit more out of control. So you have to be very careful in around how you behave as a brand.
Yeah. So I think one framing you've used in the past is the sort of the old consumer who will remain. The people are still there. There's maybe a new type of consumer, which is an agent that then feeds back to the old consumer. How are you talking to your clients about this now? Is the best approach this sort of point of being like clear and truthful? Or are there other things you're sort of are you telling them to make their own agents?
Yeah. No, they're not asking that question specifically, not to a brand consultancy firm. Uh, where I struggle with the own agents from a brand perspective, I just don't know if you're going to have many agents. And the question is, who is going to be the kind of the pool of agents? I don't know. Like that to me is not really what I would talk about. What I do talk about is more like, how can AI help you become more personal with your consumer groups? How can you actually start creating new value propositions, understanding what AI can do, so you can actually kind of expand your service offerings, which could just be to make a human more insightful, or if it's about doing like a new technical solution that's going to kind of really go into like high value consumer kind of play. There are many things that you can do with AI in terms of value proposition design. The other thing is around brand governance, where I think it actually becomes very interesting to use AI and start thinking about the quality of the work and the things and testing ideas, and be able to like, is this like, if I have this idea, this new value proposition, what is it going to do to my business? And a part of that could be, what is it going to do to the AI landscape and the agents? How are the agents going to be able to perceive this? And how does this kind of shift the perception that people have of my brand? So I think there's a lot of stuff you can do with AI there. But I think it's starting now that people are starting to think about, what do I need to do in terms of my story and narrative because of AI? But I think it's just starting at this point in time.
So, and what you just described there was actually like an agent to support your decision making as a brand.
Yeah.
Based on how other agents might perceive this information or these decisions.
Yeah.
Do you think that will just lead to like almost like paralysis of the, you know what I mean? Because it's hard enough when you put an idea into testing, right? There's always inevitably someone who doesn't like it or who does, and then it's hard to make a decision off of that.
This is exactly where it comes to the risk taking point that I made earlier. It's because this has always been just a struggle for me in my own personal career. It's like when clients want to user test things too much and get too much feedback, it waters down instantly, And, I've been lucky enough to work with clients like Nike that have always wanted to push through, and that was a lot of intuition and gut feeling when I worked with them. And that actually kind of pushed the brand forward, right? And which is amazing. But then you start working with other clients and like, no, let's put this in front of test groups. And in the end of the day, your brilliant idea is watered down to nothing. So this is that on steroids. You're right. So,
well, and that of course is sort of the I don't know dystopian's the wrong word, but that's like certainly the negative side. I think, the reason to start this discussion was around analysis and creativity and, skills of the future. You do have to make some pretty big jumps to be successful in a time of a great transition, or big shifts. And it does feel, it seems like you're saying that's a pretty important skill to cultivate at this moment.
I think it's one of the most important skills to cultivate right now is to get people to move out of their comfort zone and what they do know and start to think new. Because if we don't do that, we don't want to be stuck, we don't want to be stuck in the world just as it is. We have been very rational as an industry for a long time now. I would give it 10
the sort of brand
years.
The brand world.
The brand world. And I think even just when I look at the internet and how little that has changed in the past 15 years, and it hasn't been a lot of innovation in some ways, and I think this is just going to push us to I think actually we're going to be forced to do it. If you really think about it, it's like we're going to be forced to change the way we behave and interact, and there is convenience in it. It's always the value exchange is clear. If you can take my clutter away and it's easier to interact with agents, I'm going to do it. But is that kind of fuel bravery again in our industry? I don't know. That's going to be interesting to see.
So I'm watching this. I'm at a company that I wish would move faster. I have my initiatives that I proposed. I've written all the one-pagers. I've made vision videos. I'm painting this future. What's your advice to me? Do I keep pushing? Should I just leave and go do something else? What do you think?
I think you should keep pushing because we do have tools today. Let's not be completely there are tools around brand economics and things like that can actually help make the case. So if people get too wobbly, I'm sure you could make the case. And I'm sure Steve Jobs did that when he launched the iPhone. And if I remember it right, he sold much more than he thought it was going to do. But if you would have user tested the iPhone, I don't think it would have ever been launched. It's like you have this black thing with nothing on it. And those are the leaps that we need to make. But you can have business strategists help you out to kind of make the case, hopefully. And some brands are just going to go for it because it goes back to the purpose and the value. And they actually do think they should be doing it as a brand, which is the clarity that kind of core work can give you.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about Jobs, right? Is he was the one who was creating the clarity for himself about what he thought should be, done. And then obviously there was an extremely talented team doing amazing, interesting leaps who also believed that they could, build something different and unique.
But that's a really interesting point. And that kind of goes to this idea of talent. It's probably never been more important to have the best around you, because if you want to go on that journey, you need the risk takers. You need those kind of outrageous kind of let's shoot from the hip in the mix,
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about how to, if you're an individual, you should be extremely deep in something and you should dabble in a few other areas. And you should be very curious. You talked about that earlier. If you're a person hiring, what are you looking for right now? What are the things that a leader could do to create a team that was equipped for this moment to do something, do very courageous things?
I have always looked at attitudes like bravery and curiosity as a key component. And I think it's also, when I was growing up in the digital business, you had to have those people because you need to be able to navigate kind of the unknown. So curiosity for sure, and that kind of outrageous kind of creativity helps. So that's core. I think core craft needs to be very strong because in the end of the day, you need to love what you do. And if you're a creative person, whether it's a strategy or, design or writing or whatever that is, it's like when you love what you do, you have so much passion for the projects that you're just going to run with it and you're going to sell it and you're going to get all of those things done. But I also think what I've been looking at for the past few years has been business understanding and consumer understanding to be able to do that systems thinking. You need to build all of those things on the business and you need to understand what your clients in my business are trying to do, which is like service business. And if you don't have that, then there becomes this complete disconnect. So, curiosity, risk-taking, great craft, but also business understanding and that kind of stuff. And then soft skills. You just need to be good at communication and have the empathy.
So that's sort of like a contextual awareness, the context of things. If you're a person who doesn't feel like you have that, what are you doing? What would you tell them to do to get it? The last project I just couldn't, sell it through. Or if you're a leader and you're maybe not able to make it into the VP or C-suite level, where are they getting this? Is this like, are they reading annual reports? Are they talking to people who are CFOs? What are they doing?
I think you need to train people to do it and get them to understand why they need to do it and why it's important. I just think without it, it's going to be really hard for you to sell anything if you don't have empathy with your clients, because it could be on so many different ways. It could be like, I'm going to help this client become famous so they are going to get their recognition and promotion. Or I want to do something outstanding for this brand because I have my own ego is at stake. Sometimes it's that. But in the end of the day, you need to understand the core business, because the minute, specifically in this new world, if you go too far off it, like, okay, I'm going to have this great idea, which literally has nothing to do with the business is going to hurt from it, because you're going to have this kind of disassociation in the data that might potentially influence the perception of the brand. So I think it's been about we have to train them. It is actually one of the elements that a lot of designers are missing. And we have to commit to it as organizations to do that basic training, whether there is seminars or coaching, or we just have to train them up to be able to do that part.
Can I give you an off the wall answer and see what you think about this?
Yes.
Side projects. If you are trying to stand up your own business on the side, all of a sudden you have a tremendous amount of new understanding of just the basics of business.
Yeah.
And then often that reveals some new consumer perspectives that you maybe hadn't considered, because you're trying to sell something. And you're trying to convey what you really mean. What do you think about that? Does that seem like a viable strategy, or not as relevant because these are giant organizations we typically...
I literally like a couple of things. First one is that I actually did read about this the other day, that the people who are going to be more successful in their careers are the people who are going to be having side hustles.
So distract yourself with something else. Is that that's the advice?
It's interesting. And like in some of my previous jobs, you would have designers who would be designing hats and t-shirts on the site and selling it and building their own brand on the sidelines. And one of them was doing some miniature kind of like sculptures, and they were doing all kinds of stuff. And we actually celebrated it within the company, because it was like, okay, that's kind of the other side of you, which is not the business side here within this organization, but what you're doing on your own, which takes a lot of time. You have to be a lot of passion to do that. You have to have a lot of passion. So I actually think it's a great comment. I think that would be a good, but maybe it's not good if every single designer in the company is a side hustle.
Some people have, well, and there's where the idea of like sort of corporate innovation kind of
Yeah.
comes in, where you ask people to go start this thing and go build it out and build, proofs of concept and try to sell it to somebody.
Yeah.
I just think it's the act of having to build something with fewer resources, trying to sell it and
Yeah.
not just sort of explore it. Although I don't know, maybe that part's just me and how my brain
No,
works.
no. You know what's interesting? It's just like um, I'm a big advocate for doing stuff. I think when things are stuck in theory, it's really hard to land it. So, like, that's one of those things, right? It's really easy to talk about business understanding in theory, but if you don't just get your hands into it and try to do something, you're never going to be able to understand it. It's like that kind of tension. It's interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
It just seems to me like asking people to sort of, like you said, sit in a classroom, a seminar, learn about the theory of it, isn't isn't going to get you the sort of like both consumer and business context to be to add this different element in this sort of moment to be able to see around the corner of what is maybe coming. You've got to try to find other places to get it, because I honestly, like, reading it on the internet hasn't been cutting it for me. Maybe
It
maybe other
doesn't cut
people.
it, and the thing is, like, you never learn anything. I mean, I've learned a lot of languages, right? I had to move to Copenhagen to be able to speak Danish, even though I had been studying it for 10 years. It was not until I had to apply it that I was able to do it. It's the same with all of this stuff. It's like, it's just the minute you don't learn through school per se, you learn in the work. You learn a lot of theory in school, but then you go and you get your hands dirty, and that's actually when the real learning starts. It's when you start making.
This has been one of the arguments about generative AI, is that it's sort of doing too much of it for people, for them to learn that skill of whatever it is. And I don't know. I don't know if you have any attitudes on that.
I have a couple of thoughts on that. I think, first of all, like, I don't think we should always just take it at face value what we get out of AI. I think it's dangerous if you do that. You need to fact
It's
check.
really not
It's like,
not the
so,
strategy I employ for sure.
no, it's like, I would say a couple of things. I think, like, deep thinking is going to become more important. And, like, because we have been so surface based, and, like, we just need to get smarter. I think we've kind of dumped ourselves down with technology, like even just news headlines and stuff. No one really goes deep. I think, that's one of the things that I think AI can actually help us get to faster, but then we have to fact check it. I just used, like, ChatGPT deep thinking today. It was phenomenal. I don't know, it was true, but I was like, it was a lot of great insights, and I was like, oh, that's actually pretty foresightful. It was not only like the past, they were talking about the future, and I was like, super, super interesting. I think in terms of kind of the more visual tools, for example, the design tools, I this is exactly why I talk about being the master in the craft, because the thing is, they're not going to make everybody great designers. That's just not the way it works. It's like Figma doesn't make everybody great designers just because you have Figma. Figma makes you a great designer because you utilize the tool to get better, and you push yourself in the tool. And yes, it can help you, and you can facilitate collaboration so you can actually learn from others. But in the end of the day, you need to be a brilliant designer. And it's the same with the AI tools. You have to be a tastemaker, you have to be a creative director, and you have to have brilliant, brilliant, brilliant core skills to be able to utilize it.
So we've sort of described a future world that there is the existing consumer, the 8 billion people, many of whom are, also in work contexts as well, or maybe using software work. Then you have, I don't know how many agents, and designing for them, and what they need. And I think you sort of described the need to be very specific about what it is that your brand stands for, very clear about the products, and that becomes even more important because there's a game of sort of telephone happening to the 8 billion other people. And I think we just described how, as a human, you've got to develop a set of skills and a way of moving through the world so that you can understand what is about to get more complex, I think.
Yep. And that's not easy, because I think what's a part of that is to, like, we have to understand the human today because we're designing for today, and we have to understand the human and the agent of tomorrow. And what I think it's very interesting is just the role of brand, going back to that. If you really think about the role of brand in the world, because it's been a chat for a long time now around, our brands going to be the ones that need to be responsible to create a more sustainable world and more, ethically diverse world, and who's going to take on all of that, and what are the values that you're going to align with. I don't know if that role is going to get bigger for brands, because we can't forget, brand historically has been an emotional relationship between clients and brands most often. Sometimes it's just like transactional, like Amazon, I think is a transactional relationship, but like then you have the lifestyle brands that lean a little bit more into emotional things. And in the end of the day, we also have to think about the human, not only the agent, but the human, the emotional connection and what matters to them. And so it's going to be a brave new brand world. But, when does a brand communicate directly with you? And when do you go through the agent? And what are the kinds of touch points you're going to do in person or in your own proprietary service offering that might be a digital one? And, so it's a really interesting.
I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. Really fascinating, really interesting, a very, I think if you go beyond the sort of like surface of what people sort of think of as agents, you start to realize the things that can shift, and that they will shift in some ways unexpectedly, in ways that we can't predict. But they sort of don't remove the human, they don't remove the brand, they don't remove a lot of things about today's sort of interaction. They kind of just layer on top too.
I think so. And I think even like the acts and how a brand acts is going to just become more important. And that might be kind of, on the rise. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this tension between technology and humanity, and how people are kind of giving up their smartphones and going a little bit more analog, and what's happening in the world where people are trying to shut down social media, and like, so there is that kind of need for kind of more human connections and more kind of dialogue, and what I think is a really interesting space for brands to be like, because we have to do the tech part, and that's great because that's a very important part for our business strategy, going back to business. But then also like, let's not forget about the importance of the emotional side of things, and really dial that up. So it's going to be an interesting creative future.
I mean, why not emotional connection with tech and with brands? Like,
I
it
think
doesn't.
you can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it creates, certainly not for every brand, and I think it requires a great deal of intentionality to do those things well. Like you said, when does the brand show up, in sort of what way? Are they friendly? Are they authoritative? Are they, all of those things are real. But if you have all of these different options and ways to convey it, in addition to the ones that you already had, it's very, very interesting times.
It is interesting. And the brand voice, I keep saying this, has probably never been more important. The brand voice itself, and which oftentimes gets forgotten. People forget about it. They don't execute it well, specifically in digital. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. Are you going to be friendly? Are you going to be helpful? Are you going to be smart? Like, those are different types of voices that you have to start figuring out how you're going to sound and how you're going to talk. Because
should they be voice? Should they be on a screen? Should they be through an agent? Should they be through it? Yeah. Fura, amazing to connect, amazing to talk as always. Next time we'll get to how many languages you speak. I wanted to ask you, but
thanks, Andrew. Thank you for inviting me, and I loved the conversation, so thank you so much.
Thanks.